Well, welcome everybody. I am Tommy Hexter. I am the Executive Director of the Iowa Food System Coalition. And on behalf of our entire coalition, we are so glad to be joined by Lindsay James, candidate for the U.S. 2nd Congressional District of Iowa Congress today. Thank you for joining us, Lindsay.
So excited to be here, Tommy. Thank you for letting me be on.
Yes, and before we get started, I'll just say a few words. The Iowa Food System Coalition is a statewide, nonpartisan network working to strengthen Iowa's food system through research, policy development, communications, collaborative fundraising, and collective action. And we're getting everyone who's interested in food systems in Iowa rowing in the same direction. IFSC is made up of 65 plus partner organizations in Iowa, spanning state agencies, businesses, and nonprofit organizations working across farming, food access, public health, conservation, and community economic development to support a more resilient, equitable, and economically vibrant local food system in Iowa. We envision a future where Iowa grows more of the food it eats, and in turn, our food system grows Iowa's economy and our social networks. So this is one of many educational candidate conversations we will be having with candidates running for statewide and federal office in 2026. We reached out to all candidates running for U.S. Congress, U.S. Senate, and Iowa statewide offices, and we have scheduled interviews with all of the candidates who have responded to our request. Ahead of time, we have sent all candidates a candidate engagement guide, which includes all of the questions we are going to ask, as well as some educational resources to help them research these topics in more depth. And candidates still have time to schedule interviews with us until September 30th, 2026. So a little bit of grounding. Iowa's food and farm system is a huge topic. For the purposes of this conversation, we have broken it down into 7 priority areas, and those are the same 7 priority areas of the 2024 Iowa Food System Plan called Setting the Table for All Iowans. That plan can be accessed on our website, iowafoodsystemcoalition.org. And within each of those priority areas, we will focus on topics that we see as politically relevant, where there's been movement within the past couple of years, and where members of our coalition are investing significant time and effort into further development. Moreover, creating a better food system requires a holistic approach from farm to table, and we'll start the interview with topics that are focused on-farm policy, things like environmental stewardship and beginning farmers. We'll move to topics focused on the middle of the supply chain, things like transportation and infrastructure. And then we'll end up the conversation with topics focused on consumers, things like institutional procurement and nutrition policy. In the general format, we'll have 7 questions. We'll have 1 minute of context for each question, and then 3 minutes of answer for each. And so I'll do my best to keep time, and I'll hold up my red pen here to show 30 seconds left for each question. So some topics, a quick note, some topics may involve areas where responsibilities differ between state and federal offices, and we invite candidates to answer from the perspective of the office they are seeking and to discuss how they would use that office to advance these priorities. So without further ado, Lindsay, are we ready to get into it?
I'm so excited. I do have a clarifying question though, Tommy.
Yes,
Is
go
that
ahead.
is that red pen also going to be used to mark up my answers? You-
Nope. No,
okay,
we're just talking here today.
good,
There's no
good. Well,
grading
I
happening.
I welcome any feedback. I'm married to a teacher who carries a lot of red pens, so I'm welcome to any feedback you've got for me or any
Great.
members of the coalition.
Yeah, I'm sure folks will be listening in eagerly and be able to provide some feedback to you. So that's
Great.
great. Okay, well, let's jump in on our farm topics. The
Yes.
first topic is land and resource access, the next generation of food farmers in Iowa. And access to affordable farmland and other resources is one of the major barriers facing beginning farmers in Iowa. And in our state, we have a range of programs working to help new farmers access land, develop skills, and establish viable businesses. These include the Iowa State University Beginning Farmer Center, farm incubator programs, land trusts working to pair farmers with available land, and more recently, a USDA program called the Land Capital and Market Access Grant Program, which has funded Iowa organizations to do significant work training beginning farmers, and preparing them to access land and start their own businesses. So, our question: what policies or investments would you support to help beginning farmers access land and the resources they need to establish viable farm businesses and become the next generation of Iowa farmers?
Very excited to support all of those priorities that you already spoke to. And before I jump into specifics, I do want to just quickly say I'm Lindsay James. I'm a mom, I'm a chaplain. I've served in the Iowa legislature for a number of years. And this past summer, when the quote, big, beautiful bill came down from DC, which I'd argue is beautiful for billionaires, that's all. The only way it's beautiful, because it put at risk too many Iowans here in Iowa's second congressional district, their healthcare and other important resources that we need in our communities. And so I knew that this was a moment that would require a little bit more of me. And so our family decided to jump in and run for Congress. And here we are running for Iowa's second congressional district. So that's just a little bit about me. Let's talk about food systems. So one of the things that I love about some of the policies that our state has put forward is that we have a beginning farmer tax credit. And one of the priorities that I am pushing for on a federal level is to create a very similar program on a federal level. So one of the things that we can do is strengthen the federal state partnerships and actually either match funding that state programs have or actually, create a similar model of them. Because one of the most important things is we know that Iowa isn't Iowa without our farmers. And so supporting them are vitally important, and especially our beginning farmers who are really struggling to access land. And so one of the things about this tax credit is that it gives you a credit so that you can lease land, buy equipment, buy buildings, and get an easier start. It also incentivizes those who are, looking to lease, or, farmers who are retiring, lease their land instead of selling out to big corporations and seeing, the continuation of consolidating small family farms. It's an ability for our small farmers to kind of get in there and begin their operations.
Absolutely, yeah. A vitally important, land turnover in Iowa is always an interesting conversation, succession planning. So yeah, glad to hear your answer there on that topic.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
our next topic, if you're ready to move
yes,
on, is
yes.
Iowa's food and farming workforce. So
Oof,
as we
yes.
know, Iowa's food system depends on workers across the entire supply chain, from the farm through processing and to distribution. Farms and livestock operations, meat processing, grocery stores, restaurants, and other food businesses. And workforce availability,
Mhm.
wages, working conditions, immigration policy, and workforce development policies all have implications for Iowa's agriculture and food economy. And we have a very broad question here, but what do you see as the most important challenges facing Iowa's agricultural and food system workforce? And what role should the office you are seeking play in addressing those challenges?
So we're hearing over and over again as we are crisscrossing the district that workforce is a major issue for all industries here in our state, in particular for our, that those who are in the food supply chain business. So it's a real challenge. I had a conversation with a farmer who shared with me, a beginning farmer, who shared with me that he was making the impossible choice of whether or not his wife should leave the farming operation to go get another job in town because of the cost of healthcare. So many of our independent farmers, are struggling with the rising costs of healthcare. And so she ended up getting a second job in town. And that meant that their son had, because they couldn't afford or find additional help on the farm, their son, instead of being involved in sports and extracurricular activities in high school that he wanted to be involved in, had to come and work on the operation. And so this family shared with me the fact that they're making impossible choices because of the cost of health insurance, which then means, it becomes a workforce issue. So there's a couple of solutions that we're talking about, but Tommy, I'd be also very much so interested in what the coalition is proposing and different ideas. But we're going to work to expand affordable healthcare coverage for those who are independent farmers and who are, independently employed. Because, I believe that healthcare is a human right and that no one should have to make the impossible choice about insuring their kids. We need our kids to be insured. So, but also funding the community college ag pipeline. So that is a huge one to start training up the next generation of workers and make that accessible and affordable for them to get the training that they need to get into the workforce is another piece of this equation. And then one of the things that I have heard as well is the seasonal workforce challenges with the amount of paperwork and visas. Sometimes that timing doesn't actually match Iowa's growing season. And so then there can be kind of cogs in the pipeline of workers because of paperwork and then, loss of workforce. So there's a number of things that we can do to kind of tweak those programs and make sure that timelines match and folks are able to recruit the workforce needed in order to have a thriving operation.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing your homework on that question. That was a great answer. Some ideas to think about there for really, I mean, a lot of the farmers that we deal with and the food processing businesses, they have a tough time finding enough supply of labor, but making those jobs safer, more economically viable, all sorts of things that we can do to help improve that. And I think your ideas are helping us get on the track towards that. So thanks for sharing that.
Good. Yeah.
Um, and our next category, we're going to move right along here. Bang, bang, bang is
Here we
environmental
go.
stewardship.
Yes.
And our topic here, this is really a hot topic when it comes to the environment right now in Iowa. Obviously, there's a whole range of issues related to the environment and farming. Folks
Yes.
are talking about water quality and cancer rates, um, and what role agriculture policy plays in that, and the tough choices farmers are having to make about what they're growing and what products they're using on their land. Um, we wanted to focus on a topic that's particularly impacting food farmers right now, and that is the topic of pesticide drift. And pesticide drift is an issue that can directly affect farmers, farm workers, rural residents, and neighboring agricultural operations. Basically, it's whenever pesticides move beyond their intended application area, they can cause damage to neighboring crops and create economic and environmental consequences for farmers. We've seen numerous examples of this year. Some videos have gone viral. Some farmers have lost over $50,000 in crop value due to instances of drift.
Yeah.
And as we know, pesticide drift can pose a significant and existential threat to farmers whose crops or livelihoods are affected by these neighboring applications. So, what role should the government play in preventing and responding to pesticide drift? And what would you do in the office you are seeking to better protect Iowa farmers?
Great. Well, and I appreciate that you also mentioned water quality and soil health and, as a piece of this puzzle with also pesticide drift. So I do want to just tackle this in two different ways. One of the things that we know about the Farm Bill is that we haven't had, meaningful changes in the Farm Bill that are addressing this moment. And one of the things that we know about our water quality, so I want to start here and then we'll get into this pesticide drift as well. This is what we know about our water quality. We know that there are 300,000 Iowans who are drinking from unregulated water wells. We know that we have high levels of nitrates already in our water. We know that there are large corporations coming to legislative entities, whether that's on the state level or federal government, big corporations asking legislators to release them from liability if someone gets sick from their product. So we know all of these things. And we also know that Iowa is number one in the country for rising cancer rates. And we know that we are number two in the country for the sheer number of cancer cases in Iowa. One of the most important things that we can do when we're looking at cleaning up our waterways and protecting, our soil health is to make sure that we are incentivizing programs like wetlands, prairies, cover crops, waterways, all these kinds of different practices. But one of the conversations I had with a farmer about that was he helped me kind of look through his numbers and did some chicken scratches for me on the math about how he makes his operation work. And he's a commodity crop farmer, so corn and beans. And in order to, he's also someone who has a wetland and a prairie on his operation. In order to put those in place on his land, he has to take a certain amount of acreage out of production for corn. But the subsidies for corn are so much higher than the subsidies for practices like wetlands, prairies, cover crops. And so that can be addressed as a policy piece in the farm bill to make those subsidies really truly either match or even go further to help incentivize, when it comes to practices that keep our water quality clean and our soil health, pristine. So there's some things that we work there. Now, when it comes to specialty crops, so that's kind of a commodity crop side. When it comes to specialty crops, I too am aware of some of that pesticide drift can actually, these specialty crops, often fruits and vegetables, can be devastated by drift that actually will wipe out an entire person's livelihood for that week. And so some of the solutions that we can do there are expanding crop insurance to include specialty crops. So that is one solution approach. And I'm open to all different kinds. Oh, you're going to give me that
30
red
seconds.
pen.
Yep.
30 seconds. Okay. And then also I think we can provide grant funding to address the drift because there's kinds of
Mhm.
new technologies like drones that have precision application that we can invest in, but those are expensive technologies. So making sure that there's grant programs for farmers to access that as well. So those are some other solutions to that.
Oh, that's really awesome. Thank you for the holistic answer there. Helps us understand how you think about environment and agriculture a little bit. Thank you. Uh,
Absolutely.
so now we're going to move on. We've kind of talked about on-farm policies a bit. We're going to move on to the more of the middle of the supply chain section. And our next topic is farm and food business development, growing
Yes.
Iowa's food economy. Uh,
Yes.
we know that there's about $14 billion worth of food purchased in Iowa every year.
Amazing.
And so there's a significant opportunity to capture more economic value from food grown and raised in our state. Strengthening markets for Iowa-grown products can create opportunities for farmers and food businesses, and keeping more of that agricultural economic activity within our communities with Iowa-owned businesses. So at the state level, the Choose Iowa program and its
Yeah.
associated brand are intended to promote Iowa-grown and Iowa-made products and strengthen consumer demand for Iowa food and ag products. And at the
That's great.
federal level, the local agricultural market program grants provide significant funds to state and local efforts to promote local markets. So just the question is, what role should the government play in strengthening Iowa's farm and food businesses and growing our demand for Iowa grown and Iowa made products? How would you use the office you are seeking to help accomplish that?
So again, there's this state federal partnership that we need to strengthen when it comes to some of these programs that I was already implementing. Choose Iowa is a phenomenal program. I mean, it's helped many folks who are in the middle of this supply chain with refrigerated trucks to transport food items, with walk-in coolers to store food items. And it's actually created an opportunity to build kind of these food hubs, which really allow for different entities to, to buy local foods directly. So I see my role as, either matching federal funds or creating kind of a Choose Iowa type of model on a federal level to just further make sure that there is consistent funding to our food hubs. So that would be, you know, one of the things that when you're starting a business and you're wanting to maintain it, especially in its early years, is that having consistent funding is really important for planning. And some of these programs have been kind of hit or miss, and walked back with different administrations or invested in with different administrations. A consistent funding, especially and policies that match that, I think will really help this equation to really keep building our food hubs.
Awesome answer. Yeah, we have a saying that Iowa food farmers deserve a bigger slice of the pie. Because there's we have great programs that invest in Iowa agriculture in many ways. We receive lots of payments from the government for, a lot of Iowa agriculture, but very little of that trickles down to people growing, food for their communities. And
Yep.
so that idea that we can invest more in that infrastructure, it's really gaining a lot of popularity. The question is, how
Mhm.
can the public is there, but
Yes.
working on making sure elected officials are educated enough to be able to do this. So thank you for your answer on that question.
Yeah.
I have another similar related question. So,
Yes. Yes.
um, you know, the last question was more focused on, the brand and actually like talking to consumers and how can we build up the reputation of Iowa as a good food capital of the United States, really? The next question is something you already touched on a little bit, but uh, the infrastructure, building Iowa's local food supply chain. So farmers and food businesses need infrastructure,
They
including
do. Yep.
processing, aggregation, storage, transportation, and distribution, to
Yep.
connect that production with consumers and markets. We have the same thing, in Iowa, we have tons of agricultural infrastructure and distribution for things like corn and soybeans and pork, but most of that has led to export. And meanwhile, we have very little infrastructure for those things, aside from the food hubs and some processing for food grown in the state, although it's growing, as you mentioned. So Iowa's Food Hub network provides a great model for building this regional infrastructure. Federal programs such as the Resilient Food System Infrastructure Program and the USDA Heartland Regional Food Business Center, which was cut in July of 2025, have provided resources for producers and food businesses to develop processing and other infrastructure. So, what kind of investments or policies would you prioritize to strengthen the missing middle of this regional food system infrastructure, including food hubs, processing, aggregation, storage, and distribution? I know you talked about it a little bit already, but
Yes,
want to
I
expand
did.
more.
I got ahead of myself, didn't I? And talking about the consistent funding for the infrastructure piece,
Yeah,
because the food hubs are so clearly vital in terms of actually building a structure and a system that allows for, for example, schools to purchase, local foods and get fresh fruits and vegetables onto their campuses and in the hands of our kids. And so these hubs are so vitally important because they can do what, they can act as that middle infrastructure to help with that, expedite that. So consistent funding there, reversing the cuts that we have seen with this administration as it relates to consistent funding for these hubs, again, I think is huge. But also, I want to talk about, food banks are another beneficiary of, local food infrastructure like this. So not only are we seeing a real synergy when it comes to providing fresh fruits and vegetables for our kids in our schools, but also an incredible opportunity to provide fresh fruits and vegetables for our food banks. And there are too many Iowans who are making impossible economic choices because of the cost of living increases in their life, and they're relying on other entities like food banks to help offset these increasing costs of living for folks. So, I mean, the cost of groceries, gasoline, utility bills, housing, childcare. I mean, it's significant right now, and these kinds of impossible choices are. I talked to a dad who said he was actually making the impossible choice: do I pay my rent and keep my, apartment over the heads of my kids, a home over their heads, or do I put food on the table? And these are the kinds of impossible choices no one should have to make in the wealthiest country in the world. And, again, we will tackle lowering costs through a lot of different policies. But, making sure people have access to healthy food is hugely important. And so strengthening these food hubs is one way we can do that.
absolutely. Yeah, great answer, and it leads into our next category, which is we're gonna move to the table now. We've done
Yes.
farm too, and now we're going to the table. And yeah, talking more about the consumer side of the whole food system.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the first question
Yep.
is about procurement, and this
Yes.
is connecting Iowa farmers with public institutions. So schools and other public institutions purchase significant amounts of food, creating an
Yes.
opportunity to use this public purchasing power to strengthen Iowa agriculture and our local economies. In the past, federal programs like the Local Food for Schools and the Local Food Purchasing Assistance Program have helped connect farmers and food businesses with institutional and community markets. Federal funding for LFPA and LFS has been discontinued, creating uncertainty about how these markets and relationships can be sustained. In that vacuum of funding at the state level, the Choose Iowa purchasing program has stepped in to provide an opportunity to encourage purchasing and consumption of Iowa grown and Iowa made products by schools and food banks, just at a smaller level of funding. So, the question here is, how would you use the authority of the office you are seeking to strengthen farm to school and other institutional purchasing opportunities for Iowa farmers and food businesses, particularly as the cancellation of federal programs such as LFPA and LFS have left farmers without about a $3 to $5 million market that they relied on to sell their products?
I think that people saw the benefit so clearly when these programs were in place. And when the administration rolled back these programs again, it caused a vacuum. And Iowans stepped in because that's what we do when there is a challenge in front of us. And the Choose Iowa program really did help, provide some smaller amount of funding, as you put it, to these programs. But I am, Tommy, and for those who are tuning in, I am a feisty redhead. I've got some things to say. When we get to Washington, D.C., I am also a mom with kids. And I am all about making sure that we are giving our kids their best chance at life. And it is so clear how we do that. We give them access to healthy foods. We make sure that they have safe and secure housing. And we make sure that our schools are strong so that, they can have opportunity and build the life we know that they deserve here in this state. And so, again, I am going to be fierce and a fierce mama bear when it comes to advocating for programs that would actually put healthy food in front of our kids every single day in their school context and food banks as well. So again, we saw the benefit of it when it was reversed with this administration. Iowa had to step in. Good for us. We're going to do it. We saw the value. We knew it worked. And so now it's just fighting to make sure that folks in DC get it right, because reversing those cuts, were hard on us, and we know how it needs to get done. So I'm going to go fight for that.
Yeah, and I love how you put it that, when there's a whole Iowans will come and make sure each other are supported.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
Yeah, the work is, even though that funding was cut, the work is very much still alive. And just this week, actually, the Choose Iowa School Purchasing Program applications opened, and schools are now applying for funding to keep doing that. So,
So
um,
good.
yep, again, it's growing despite all the challenges, and great
Yeah.
to hear your answer
Well, and it
on that.
benefits everyone. I mean, it benefits everyone. It benefits our schools, it benefits our kids, it benefits our farmers, it
Yep.
benefits our local economic
Yes.
realities. I mean, these are such incredible programs and investments in communities. And so keeping these kinds of investments strong is a huge priority.
Yeah, awesome. Very good. Thank you, Lindsay. And then we're on to our final question. Our time together is almost over. But one topic that we're really excited to talk about is the food, nutrition, and health, connecting food with health. As we all know, food and health are deeply interconnected, and there are
Mhm.
many pieces to the larger food and health puzzle, including federal and state policies related to Medicaid and SNAP, um, particularly related to Iowa's food system. Farm to food as medicine is an emerging approach that our folks are working very closely on, connecting
Great.
Iowa agriculture with healthcare and nutrition interventions through programs like Medicaid reimbursement and nutrition incentive programs. Other efforts include Double Up Food Bucks, the
Yes.
Iowa Produce Prescription, and which are both broader efforts through the Iowa Healthiest State Initiative. At the same time, food system questions intersect with issues such as chronic disease, access to nutritious food, and the prevalence of highly processed foods. And these connections raise broader questions about how agricultural, food, health, and environmental policies can all work together to promote a greater health for our citizens here in Iowa. Um, and so the question, from soil health to human health, how should Iowa connect food and agricultural policy with public health? And what role should the office you are seeking
Mhm.
play in advancing approaches such as food as medicine, food as health, nutrition incentives, and other strategies that improve access to healthy local food and address diet-related health challenges?
Yeah. So again, healthcare is something that we're hearing across the district. People making impossible choices because they are one healthcare emergency away from, losing their home or not being able to put food on the table for their kids and their families. And so and we know public health and data and science show us that, healthy foods it makes a huge difference when it comes to our healthcare outcomes. And so, why wouldn't it make sense to then connect this as a, food is medicine approach to our local farmers and our food production systems here in Iowa? And so, I will be working obviously with Medicare and, have an outsized influence as a congressional person in talking about Medicaid as well when it comes to reimbursement rates and making sure that providers can, prescribe a CSA box to someone who needs access to healthy food and can't afford it on their own. Those are the kinds of things that we can, fight for and push on a federal level that could make a huge difference in the healthcare outcome of one of our neighbors and a huge difference when it comes to, the farming operations that we have here in our local food system. So again, these are investments that are worth it. Iowans are worth the investment. And these aren't just, small fixes. These are the kinds of fixes that will have a ripple effect for generations to come when it comes to Iowans' health and our food systems here in Iowa.
Amazing. Yeah, we think of fixes like that are impacting the whole system. It's a systemic fix. It helps fix a system that right now is struggling and replace it
Yes.
with a system that's better for farms and better for human health. So, thank
Um,
you for sharing that answer. Yeah, I love the idea of doctors being able to prescribe a local produce box.
yes.
So yeah, that's great. Well, we're about at the end of our time. We've been through 30 minutes. I just want to give you a chance if you have anything else to say, and then I'll wrap us up.
Well, I just am extremely grateful for the members of the coalition who are doing this hard work. And Iowa is not Iowa without our farmers. Iowa is not Iowa without you. So keep it up, and I'm going to do everything that I possibly can as your congresswoman to fight to make sure that we are strengthening our local food systems here in our state.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and that I'm sure that'll get passed along through many ways to our Food System Coalition members. And I just want to thank everyone for tuning in, and a special thanks to State Representative Lindsay James, running for Iowa's second congressional district, for joining us today and for giving so much thought to our answers here. And I look forward to the next time we continue this conversation. This conversation is just starting, so thank you.
Absolutely. I look forward to it too. Thank you so much for having me on.